Hey everyone, welcome to the Secret Garden and Base Camp's Campfire Conversation. And tonight we are joined by Jack Lenedy and John Hard, and they're going to talk about the topic that they have entitled Hate Your Job? Maybe It's a Good Thing. And I am looking forward to this. So I'm going to turn it over to John and to Jack and say, you guys, hey, take it away. We're all really eager to hear what you have to say. Because some of us have hated our jobs at one time or another.
I think it's God's little joke on me today because this has been one of the worst days in my office I've had in a long time. So Jack always has great days at his work.
They've been lining up pretty good lately, but not. That's funny you had one that was tough today.
Well, and it ties into the conversation, so we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But anyway, I'm glad to have Jack with us, and Jack and I have talked about this back and forth over the years. We have at least one or two calls annually to cry on each other's shoulders, and we've talked about work and the heartaches of it. And in fact, I think both of us have been able to experience some degree of victory in just dealing with our attitude towards work and our work situation and how we can bring our calling into it. So anyway, this ought to be fun. And I asked Gary in an email. Of course, he never responds to my email, so I don't know what the answer is, but I asked him if Monday morning's call that he sent out by email was intentional or was that simply God's sovereignty. But those of you who may not have seen it, he talks about with God, the issue is always about the glory He has given you and where He wants you to offer it. He's talking about our workplace. And then he says it's never about job fit or your personal satisfaction. It always goes back to what aspect of His glory that He wants you to bring into the workplace. So I'm just curious, Jack, could you comment on that some and how that's been true in your life?
Yeah, I mean, years ago when I started listening to some of Gary's stuff, and just the whole idea that your job is an assignment or it's not your calling necessarily. That really freed me up, and I had to listen over and over again because for some reason it was so tangled. I always was going back to, well, my work is not fulfilling. I want it to be my calling, and I kept attaching, that whole idea of, who I'm called to be and where I work is somehow mixed, and to some degree it is, but I kept, looking for my identity, and that's kind of why I almost went into a whole different career path because I felt like I wasn't identifying, my gifting or my my calling, the glory God's put in me. I felt like it wasn't being revealed or lived out in my work. So that was a long journey though, and it's still an ongoing one. As it is with you and everyone else. It's just keep coming back to what does this job have to do with who I feel I am and who God's created me to be, and that area.
What kind of things have you seen that have changed over the last 2-3 years, in your workplace, and in your job satisfaction or lack thereof?
Well, early on, I kept wanting to be fully and completely in something I love, and I kept just because it couldn't be full and complete, I felt like I wasn't in the right place. And so one of the things that over time with me, just I kept looking at things that I was doing at the office and trying to, as much as I could, kind of get away from the things that were stealing a lot of joy and life, and maybe hand that off to somebody else, or just stop it completely, and then look at areas where I actually did enjoy things, because there was things that I was enjoying. It just was underneath a pile of mess that I didn't enjoy.
So let me ask you a question, Jack or John. I don't know, as Jack was saying, I don't know that we're ever going to find a job that 100% of it fits 100% of us. At least not this side of, the clouds. But what's a reasonable point? If I am an extreme extrovert, which I'm not, let's say I'm an extreme extrovert, but I have to sit inside a cubicle 9 hours a day and plug numbers into spreadsheets, I think that's a really bad fit. But, does it have to be a 10% fit, a 70% fit, a 98% fit? What's reasonable?
I'm not sure there is a magic number, to be real honest. God has us each on a journey, and it may be that for you at this moment in time, a 10% fit is exactly what you need. Or it may be that 10% fit is your indicator that it's time to move on. I'm not sure you can really answer that in a blanket statement. It really kind of comes back to the person. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, it's so messy. We talked the other day, John, about the Shawshank Redemption movie and how they were in prison, and yet they were still able to build relationships with each other, and they kind of actually were showing their glory in a way. I can't remember the main character's name. He was working the books for the warden, and that was just who he was. He was going to do that outside of prison or inside of prison, but he had a way of connecting with other guys, and so what you say in that situation, they're not even free, but yet Morgan Freeman and these other guys, they're kind of living out their glory somewhat, even in that situation. So, a job that you just hate, and you could say, this doesn't fit me at all. I feel like I'm in a prison, but God can use that, and He, will. It's just opening up that conversation and trying to, just get on that journey with Him. Yeah, I don't know.
So let me ask you both a question. I'd like to hear both of your answers. I agree with you. I think that there are times that God puts us in a place, I don't know, to train us, to show us something new about ourselves that we didn't know about. And at the beginning, it seems horrible. But He's training us, and it's the right place for us in that moment. I think there's other times that sometimes God takes something that was good and He sours it because it's one more clue maybe to say that we're supposed to be moving somewhere else. Boy, I'm hearing an echo in this. An echo. So
you're echoing, but I don't think John is.
It all sounds fine to me.
John is. But anyway, so here's my question. I'll shut up because I'm echoing. What would you say are an indicator? So somebody's in a job that they really don't like. What are some indicators that might be, this is a good place for you to stay for right now, versus maybe this is a time to leave? And I know that you're not God yourselves, but what are just some clues that you would have in your own heart about why this might be a time to stay versus this might be a time to make some changes?
I think if you keep coming back to God and you're trying to understand more and you're connecting with Him more, and it's kind of, if that relationship is building, even if it's difficult situation, but you feel like I'm really seeking God, and maybe He's teaching some other areas that aren't related to your work directly, but He's your character's being molded and shaped, or your patience, or whatever it is. I mean, there's all kinds of things He might be after, and the job is just the thing that's a thorn in your side to get you to kind of come to that conversation and have it. What do you think, John?
Well, I have to relate it back to my own experience, because I think I'm constantly, the thought crosses my mind, I hate this job and I've got to find something different to do. And that's not really true, because I don't absolutely hate my job. In fact, I'm really grateful for it, and there's a lot of good that this job offers me. And so that's when I start thinking in terms of, well, what are those good things? Does it allow me to bring the weight of my life into other people's lives? Does it allow me to exercise my calling here? And to some degree it does. Days like today, where I'm just holed up and crunching numbers all day, are just miserable for me. And so this is one of those days where I'm thinking, okay, Lord, I'm going to invite you into this, because I'm miserable here by myself. So there are times like that where it's just beneficial for me to go through the stress and the pain and the lack of desire, because it shapes me, it hones me, it prepares me for other things that are coming in the future. So anyway, it just kind of gets back to, is where you are at a good fit for your calling? And if it is, then even though you may not like it, Paul probably didn't like jail either. And your example, Shawshank, they didn't enjoy it. You couldn't say, well, this just makes my heart come alive to be in jail. But, Paul's heart came alive when he was talking to the jailer, when he was writing the letters. So his assignment was not fun, but his heart was still coming alive.
Right. I was going to, along those same lines, how long a season is it that you've been in, where you are just totally covered down, and your heart's not coming alive whatsoever? That's probably a time, that hey, something needs to change. But if you're having moments, that I connected with this patient, this client, I had this great conversation with somebody. Even if it's not directly related to your work, but you feel your heart kind of come up to the surface, then that's still kind of God saying, hey, there's still something here that you could continue to pursue.
And one of the things you have talked about in many of our conversations... Let me just
interrupt half a minute. Jack, you were echoing as well. I guess one of the things is, let's all just turn our speakers down a little bit. Maybe there's some kind of feedback, or make sure we don't have a second device that's live. We got to be able to hear each other, so don't turn it down too much. I would say along the lines of what... I'm turning mine down too, by the way. Along the lines of what I heard from Jack is, I remember a situation where I had a job that I really didn't like. And honestly, when I prayed about it, I felt like God say, stay. I wouldn't say that there was any words of wisdom that I had, other than, and I didn't even hear God say, I'm teaching you something. I just felt like God say, stay. And it was enough for me to stay. And I would say later on, I look back at it and said, I actually learned lots and lots of stuff about myself that I wouldn't have learned somewhere else, that God was put me there for a purpose. So sometimes I think it just relies on raw revelation from God. And that's good enough for me. I'll take raw revelation anytime.
Exactly. In fact, this week, I guess it was Monday night, I just happened to see on TV, I was about halfway, the movie was about halfway through, but it was The Pursuit of Happiness, Will Smith. And I don't know who all watching has seen that, but the movie's about his just incredible struggle trying to make it in the world. And at the very, very end of the movie, you see him experience success for the first time ever, and it's pretty big success. And there's this one scene, you can see the tears welling up, he's excited, he grabs his kid and hugs him, and he's running through town. And I thought, that scene is fantastic for this movie. But if you haven't seen the first part of the movie, and you haven't gone through all the pain and heartache that he's been through, that scene just makes no sense, and it just doesn't have any impact. And as I was thinking that, the verse came to mind, the steps of the Lord are established by God, and the steps of a man are established by God, and he delights in his way. And it's like the Lord said, you know, when you're at work and you're struggling and you're despondent and you really don't like where you are, I'm loving watching you struggle. I'm loving being there with you in the midst of that, because I know what the final scene looks like. And this is leading up to that final scene, and it's going to be great. But right now, you've got to continue on. So it's kind of like when he said to you, well, just stay, because he's just having so much fun watching us do our work, experience our calling, and go through times when we just don't like it.
Yeah. One of the things too is we tend to be really either or oriented. In other words, you know, you'll think I'm either going to stay as an accountant or I'm going to go into full-time ministry, or I'm going to, you know, I'm either going to stay with this firm or I'm going to quit and move, you know, cross country and join that other firm. And it's very I don't know how. You know, either or. It's just like there's no in between kind of thing. And I think one of the things that helped me is I started widening my options a little bit and looking at what I could change. Again, to kind of minimize the things that were really burdensome, and then, you know, kind of make more room for the things that I was enjoying. And so, you know, I had to stop doing, like, for instance, x-rays. I used to do all my own x-rays. I just couldn't stand it. I mean, some guys would love to do that and enjoy, you know, the whole process, but I'd take them and analyze them, and I just couldn't stand it. It was a downer for me, and every time I saw on the schedule that I had to do something, I was so annoyed. And another thing with insurance, you know, there was a particular insurance that was just, you know, a big downer. I mean, it was a pain to deal with. It sucked a lot of energy and life out of the office. And, you know, I had to make a decision. Hey, I'm not going to make that money anymore from that insurance, but I'm going to enjoy the day more. And I think that is an area that a lot of guys, like, either they're not willing to make less, you know, if it's something that, you know, they're drawing income from, or you know, they don't want to hand something off to somebody else. You know, they just kind of knot it up in that way, but yet they don't like it. They're not doing anything to change it. I know there's some things you can't change, but there's probably more that you can do than you think. You know, and it's amazing. You don't have to, you know, have this either or. I'm either going to stay in this or I'm going to totally quit it. It's like, look for ways where, you know, you can look at what's enjoyable or what lifts you up in your current work and try to focus on it, you know, and highlight it.
And I remember you using the term over the years as we've talked about this. You call that tweaking your situation. You know, I think that's a good term, because every one of us, you know, regardless of the situation, you may be in the job you absolutely love, but there are going to be things about it that still can be changed, and just tweaking a few things here and there can make a lot of difference.
You know, as you guys are talking, I remember a programmer that we had at our company she was really, really good, and I remember at one point us offering her a promotion. And at the annual review time, when we gave her a promotion, she says, you know, I'm going to turn down that promotion, and I've decided to reduce my work hours from 40 hours a week to 30 hours a week. Would that be okay with you? I said, what do you mean? Who's turning down a promotion with a lot of money and prestige? And she said, well, I'm doing some other stuff that I really enjoy, and I think that I want to do that instead. And, I mean, it's sort of, it's different than what John was talking about, but it's the same, or Jack was talking about, it's the same thing, because she tweaked her circumstances, and she said, I can live without that money, or, you know, I can live without that promotion because there's something else that I like more. And, you know, Jack said, we decided not to work with that insurance company, and Jack decided he wasn't going to do the x-rays himself, have someone else do it. And as Jack is saying, I bet if we thought about our lives, there's more ways we could tweak the circumstances than sometimes we think is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, I was thinking when you were talking, Sam, that so many times we've taken a script from somebody else. They've been handed to us, and we've just taken and ran with it. And you could run with it for 10 or 20 years, just thinking, this is what I have to do. This is what it means to be successful. This is what it means in my chosen profession. What you have to do, and you just got to get that untangled, and because I think what helps is start to knowing who you are and being okay with who you are, and saying, you know what, I'm going to stop doing some things possibly, or start doing some things that are more aligned to what I've learned about who I am and who God's made me to be, and to get some freedom in that.
Let me throw this question out, and this kind of gets back to Sam's question a while ago, but I'm wondering, what's the difference between my job is difficult, I hate it, but I sense God wanting me to persevere through it? What's the difference between that and, well, I'm just stuck and it's really time to move on? How do you know when it's really time to move on?
Well, I mean, let's just throw some stuff out. We're not writing the Bible on this. We're just sharing our own experiences. I would say that one thing is when things seem toxic. It's one thing to be in a situation where we're not enjoying it. It doesn't feel fulfilling. It's another situation where it seems toxic to our soul. People are demeaning us in a way that we can't take anymore, or there's sexual temptation or something that's beyond our ability to handle, or there's immorality. John, if you were working at a company where they're cooking the books, at a certain point you just can't do it. I think there's a real distinction between something we dislike and something that we can't tolerate. So one thing is that there is something like a toxic environment. And I would say another thing is, when I left work, I was disliking work mostly, but I was taking a period of time and I felt like God say it's time to leave. Sometimes God's revelation is to stay, and sometimes God's revelation is to go.
Yeah, and I think you can also put a tripwire in what you're doing. In other words, if this doesn't change within the next 6 months or within the next year, or when I run out of another $20,000, it's time to. It's time to. That was my story, by the way. If you got to get to a thing where I'm going to persevere. But I also, maybe want to go to God and say, hey, is there a way to say at this point, if this relationship isn't better with my boss, or if this, client that is, this way, or whatever the situation is, have a tripwire that says, when we get to this point, whether it's a money thing or whether it's a time frame, where you expect or things should be different, because I think I just feel for a guy that, he thinks he's persevering, but he's really not making a decision, a difficult decision, or having a difficult conversation with someone. I know for me that was the case. I was avoiding a difficult conversation with a partner. And I stayed probably 3 years longer than I should have. Well, I know I stayed 3 years longer than I should have. I spent $20,000 more than I should have. And if I would have had something, somebody come along and say, "Hey, if in 6 months this isn't better, you should leave," I might have saved myself, a couple years there. If that makes sense.
I like both of your ideas, the tripwire idea, and you just ended it. Somebody could have said, when I finally left work, I got a council of 5 guys together and asked their advice. And as you were just saying, someone outside the situation can sometimes see it more clearly than we can. And I think that's one of the things we should do at base camp. You know, if a guy's in a job that he hates, grab 5 of us and say, can you meet with me once a month for an hour on the phone or on Google Hangouts? And I'll talk through my situation, and we'll pray with you, we'll talk with you, we'll ask questions, and we want to help each other.
I was just getting ready to share your story, Sam, so I'm glad you said that. And I love that idea, because a career change is a major event in your life. It's a major choice, and you really don't want to make a major choice like that all alone. Getting the wisdom of friends. I go back to my wife, because she knows me better than anybody. And when I start talking this way, I just, she has to keep reminding me, this is really a good place for you to be, and there is not, God really hadn't opened anything else up for you. So I just cherish her wisdom.
Who are you, buddy? Yeah, my wife was telling me for years I should have made a change, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't listening to her.
You will next time.
Yeah, she was telling me, where it made a huge change for me is I went to a calling retreat in Atlanta, and these guys, when we broke out into small groups, we looked at each other's stories, and at the very end we gave, the last day or whatever, some ideas for each other, and all 4 of them, there was 3 or 4, said that I should leave my partnership and get in my own practice. And I thought they didn't hear anything I said over the last 2 days, because I wasn't looking for that information. I didn't want to hear that, because I didn't want to deal with the difficult conversation and difficult relationships that were going to happen after I made that choice, So I know I'm my own personal thing, but a lot of times it's something that's in us that, it's a fear or a lack of courage, and it's holding us back. And God's wanting to walk us through it, but I don't know. I'm losing my track here, but it's all tied together, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think a lot of times God likes to test our resolve just to see, how bad do you want something else? How much are you willing to change in your situation? What are you willing to give up? A lot of times that's just to see where we really are. It's part of that character development, strength, testing of our character.
Well, one of the things you guys had said at the beginning of this presentation was that sometimes God is teaching us something about our attitude. He wants to change us. Because if you think about it, in the Western world that we live in, we have just a lot more choice than other people do. And you look at, the big heroes of the faith, and they went through difficulty, and I don't think they had a lot of option. David was a shepherd, and he didn't want to be a shepherd. He was the runt of the litter, and so he got the crap job. And Joseph was in prison; he was a slave. We know that Moses was a shepherd also for 40 years. Joshua, who's this tremendous warrior, he's an understudy to Moses. Now Moses is a cool warrior. I mean, let's say Moses is a cool leader, but Joshua is meant to be a leader, and he doesn't become the big cheese for decades. He's an understudy. He's the wingman instead of the leader. And they didn't have options back then. We have choices, and I think that God did something in their characters that maybe sometimes we need to learn some of. Sometimes God wants to move us. But sometimes God says, just because you have all these choices doesn't mean that you should make all those choices. Sometimes there's something in our own hearts that we just have to, let loose, let go.
When I sent the email out a couple of days ago, I included that picture of the Indians around the campfire, and I did that on purpose because I happened to see that picture, and I thought, can you imagine those Indians around the campfire discussing job satisfaction? That doesn't make sense. They they had their jobs. They did it every single day, all day. They worked hard. They suffered through whatever they had to survive. And I think a lot of times when we talk about calling or job satisfaction or things like that, we ask the question, what makes your heart come alive? And that's a good question, but it can be misinterpreted by what makes your emotions come alive and what makes you feel good. And that's not really what our heart is all about. And I think the better question is, what is it that is the compelling drive within you? You know, like Paul's drive to preach the gospel. He was compelled to preach the gospel. He did it just within days of coming to Christ, and he did it everywhere he went. It didn't always make him come alive, I don't think. I don't think it always brought great emotions. In fact, when he got arrested or when he got beaten or stoned or, you know, I doubt if his heart was emotionally alive at that time. But he was compelled, and there's a different way of looking at things when you're talking about your heart. You're really not talking about your emotions.
I think, John, that's really good. I mean, so I can be stuck in a job that I don't like, but I might be compelled to bring encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I don't like the job, I can be encouraging to people. You know, I was just talking with a guy for lunch today he's a brilliant guy. He's an attorney right now that's brilliant. But for years, he sort of did some blue-collar work. So he was actually just doing I think he was moving. He was working for a moving company. You know, he just didn't know what he was supposed to do. And so I think from age 20 to age 30, he worked for a moving company, you know, just hauling furniture around. And he said his boss made it fun. He said his boss made it a game. They made it enjoyable. The guys laughed. They stayed late. He said it wasn't a job designed for my calling. He said, but I had a boss that made it work, and we all had fun together. And I thought there is something just that you're talking about, that sometimes we can bring something to an environment that can change the environment. You know, you might bring encouragement or insight or sympathy or an open ear to listen to people, and you can be in a pretty cruddy job and still be bringing life to people because of the compelling you have.
Yeah, and just the essence of who you are. You know, you may be a good manager, and you know you're needed in a job where everything is in disarray. But you know you're compelled to get in there and put things in order. It may not be a whole lot of fun, but that's what your compulsion is.
Yeah, I think along the lines of, and I've heard it said different ways, but you know, we all want to do what we love. We want to, do the work we love and do the things we love to do, but there's a difference between that and loving what you do. And I like to say it's loving what you bring, and just, looking at opportunities to do that, to love what you bring to the table, instead of just going, I just want to do what I love. I just want to do what I love. It's like, how about loving what you do, loving what you bring? And you can do that at your office, at home, at church, down at wherever, the restaurant, the pub, or whatever. I mean, you can bring who you are to the life around the campfire. I mean, those Indians, it's funny that they're not talking about work necessarily, but they're engaging in relationship, and they're bringing who they are to that place,
I've never heard it said that way, Jack, and I like that. I think that's one of the best things I've heard out tonight.
Oh, well, then I'm done.
Yeah.
So closing thoughts from either one of you, both of you. I know Jack just gave it, but it was so good you could say it again.
Not just doing what you love, but loving what you do.
Loving what you bring.
And loving what you bring is how I like to say it, because loving what you bring is really, it's not even just about doing, it's loving what you bring.
I just love that.
So what are your closing thoughts, John?
Well, and I've enjoyed this conversation. To me, it gets back to just walking with God, just taking the journey with Him and inviting Him into every moment of your life. So when you're at work and you're miserable, or you're excited, things are going great, you're bringing your calling, or maybe you're not, in every situation, just bring him in and just walk with him in that. If you think it's time to move, just ask him. Let him speak to your heart about what the direction is. Maybe he'll say move, maybe he'll say no, stay, maybe he'll say change your situation some. So it's just a journey. Walk with God.
That's good, Joe.
Hey, you guys. Thanks very much. And everybody at Base Camp and Secret Garden, it's just good having you here. And John and Jack especially, we thank you for taking time to share with us what you're learning, what you're hearing. We love it. So thanks very much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.